My father warned me before my wedding that he believed my fiancé would cheat on me if presented with an opportunity. I hated that he told me this. I never had a good relationship with my father, and I believed he was jealous that my fiancé was prettier than my mom and really in love with me. I didn't plan on having a close relationship with him during my married life. My mom was different. I could tell her anything, and she was really supportive. I almost felt bad she was still married to my asshole of a father. I went through with the marriage because my woman never gave me something to worry about. We were married for 7 years, living an hour and a half away from my parents that entire time before more than one marriage came to an abrupt end. My wife had a job 30 minutes away in the direction of my parents' house. She started to become condescending and rude to me in February of that year. Eventually, I felt like the less I said, the better, so we just started watching movies or shows together when she was home from work. I worked from home, writing and recording music. There. When I first started getting gigs, my wife was really supportive and came to my shows. After a few years, she got bored with it. I think she wished for me to become rich and famous. My wife continued disrespecting me and getting snappy until she told me she needed to start working late sometimes. I didn't believe that was the case. I waited in my car in her work parking lot. When she left at the usual time, she drove the opposite direction of work. I followed her all the way to my parents' house. I turned off my car lights way down the road and just inched closer along the curb. I saw my dad get in the car with her before she drove away. Was all I could think as I followed them at a long distance. I called my mom as I drove. She was out to dinner with a group of old friends. She asked me if anything was wrong and if she needed to come home, and I told her no. I said she could call me tomorrow. I didn't want to tell her what was happening. They pulled into a shopping center suddenly, and I think it was because they suspected they were being followed. I continued on, pulling into a neighborhood shortly ahead. I could see through the trees the moment my wife's car pulled out. They literally drove down the street to a hotel. I parked my car next to hers. This couldn't be happening. Did she drive my dad to a hotel? How was I supposed to get through something like this? How was my mom supposed to get through this? It was so unfair. After this, I was going to move out of state. My wife and father came out of the hotel an hour later. I was waiting by my wife's car, and she freaked out when she saw me. My dad had a strange demeanor. I then decided to walk up to him and punched him in the face. He fell down, and a hotel employee saw this. They called the police. My wife was already crying. She couldn't believe I was there. I think because I was there, she was more abruptly hit with the reality of what she'd done. She cried really hard, telling me she was sorry repeatedly. I screamed some choice words at her while my dad got to his feet. I told him he was a horrible father, and the only reason my wife slept with him was that he convinced her to. I told him he was dead to me. I looked at my wife and called her a worthless harlot. I told her I would never see her again after our divorce was final. She reached out for me with tears streaming down her face like she needed a forgiving embrace. I pushed her away, and she started crying even more. I got in my car to leave, but the police showed up. I told them everything that happened, and my dad, surprisingly, didn't press charges against me for punching him. My wife apparently felt some remorse because she refused to give my dad a ride home. The police had to. I found out the next morning that he told my mom he was mugged while on a walk. I ignored all the calls and texts from my wife. She apparently slept in the hotel parking lot in her car since I told her she wasn't welcome in my house anymore. My mom called me the next morning, which is when she told me about the mugging. As hard as it was, I told her what happened the night before. At first, she didn't believe me, but then it made more sense to her, and she knew I wouldn't lie about this. She wasn't as upset as I thought. She was more apologetic to me because it was my wife. She said she hadn't been very happy in the relationship for a while now, and this was a good time to end it. I was relieved. We could support each other through the divorce process. My mom moved in with me, and my wife moved in with my dad. She only stayed there for 1 week, though. My dad said she wasn't worth keeping around. Due to the infidelity and the police report that recorded the 3 of us at the hotel, my mom and I each got to keep our houses. My dad moved into a motel. My mom's house was built in such a way that it could easily be transformed into 2 independent living spaces. I used the money from selling my house to remodel my mom's house so I could live with her. She loved this idea. We each had our own front door, but we lived in the same place. We kept each other company and gave each other support. My wife moved out of state instead of me. She apparently had a distant cousin to live with in Philadelphia. My ex tried apologizing and asking me if we could move on from it, even after the divorce. She had a hard time accepting we were over, and she told me she missed me every day. I'm sorry, but cheating on me with my father is unforgivable. She didn't deserve to have anyone trust her again. As soon as she got a new boyfriend, I took the liberty of sharing with him through social media what my ex did to me. At first, he didn't believe me, but he broke up with her a month later. My ex called me, crying and yelling at me. I told her I didn't do anything wrong. If anything, I spared him heartbreak. She said she wouldn't do that ever again, and I asked her what made her do it to me. She said she didn't know, but my dad talked to her about how I never grew up to be a man and she could be loved better. I haven't spoken to my dad since that day. I don't know where he is or what happened to him. My mom hasn't spoken to him either, but we're there for each other. We each found a new person to start dating, so that's cool. I don't respond or answer calls from my ex anymore, and I won't barge into her dating life again. I realized I have to move on, and if I'm speaking with every new partner she has, I'm not moving on very well. I've actually gotten more gigs and income from my music since this happened. It's the thing I enjoy the most in life, and the fact that I can pursue this dream makes me a very happy man. Wow, OP, I am so sorry your father treated you this way. It's incredibly wrong and inappropriate of him. I'm glad you and your mom cut him out of your lives. It's amazing you both had each other for support, but so disappointing that this even happened. I'm relieved no charges were pressed against you in the heat of the moment, discovering your wife cheated on you. You made the right decision to immediately separate from your wife and file for divorce. I don't think anyone could completely forgive or move past this level of betrayal. Your wife had already started to see you in a bad light. She should have been mature enough to know how she felt about you, independently of how your father felt about you. I believe you will find a woman who's mature enough to know that trust and communication are needed if a relationship is meant to last. A successful relationship needs two selfless and considerate people who don't let their egos get out of hand. Thank you for sharing your story. Now let's get into today's second story. My wife, 25, took up a part-time job with Uber Eats to help earn us some extra money. I, 29, just started a good job, but I wouldn't be paid very much until my first raise after the training period. My wife was out driving around a lot, and she had this one male friend that she talked to all the time. They'd been friends since they were 12, so when we got married, I didn't feel like I had a right to end their friendship. It had only ever been a friendship all the way to this point, so I didn't feel very worried about it. I knew her Facebook password, which was the only platform she used to message or call anyone, but I never logged into it until one particular day. On this day, I was at work and she was Uber eating. Suddenly, for no reason at all, my brain told me to log into my wife's Facebook. I was pretty weirded out by it and hesitated. The longer I waited, the worse I felt. So I did it, and I was shocked. She was live messaging the friend I mentioned, and they were making arrangements for her to come over again. He mentioned that it was really convenient she was doing a delivery job and had a reason to be out. She said it was the perfect opportunity for them to have play dates all the time. I can't tell you how much panic I felt in my chest. I just happened to log into her Facebook at work and read this. I called my coworker over. We were pretty good friends, and told him what was going on. He asked if their messages had an address in them, and they did, from 4 months ago. I was on the verge of throwing up. I couldn't imagine my wife going behind my back like this even once. My coworker noticed how upset I was, and he gave me a pat on the back. He said his wife cheated on him 2 years ago, and since then he's met a new woman who hasn't wronged him even once. It really helped to hear that at the moment, but I didn't want to apply it to my situation yet. He suggested I file for divorce right away. I couldn't. I had to confront her first. Maybe I would the next day, but I just wanted to see what she had to say. I scrolled through the messages, some getting incredibly sexual or flirtatious. The first, "I love you," I saw was a knife through the heart. That's what made me decide to file for divorce. When I got home, I waited for my wife to walk through the front door. My coworker actually came over for the first time that night to be my support. As soon as my wife entered, she saw us sitting in the living room. I introduced her to him and said he is my witness and support while I go through this time in my life. She was really confused and asked what I meant by that. I asked her how her play date went. I'm sure her heart stopped at this moment. She looked like she saw the Grim Reaper, and then she fainted. When she came to, she was laying on the couch. I asked her again how her play date went, and she covered her face. She started wailing and crying. I told her I didn't have time for all this and wanted an answer. She just said she couldn't. I went and got my packed stuff with the help of my coworker, and we loaded up his car and mine. She was freaking out the whole time, begging me to forgive her and let her prove to me she would never do this again. I told her I married her with the promise of her being faithful. Now that I knew she wasn't, why would I stick around? My coworker nodded in agreement as he helped me. I followed him to his house and stayed there while I looked for a new place to live. Unfortunately, my wife's mom owned the apartment we lived in, and she didn't like me very much. Speaking of my MIL, my wife begged me not to tell her what she'd done because then she certainly wouldn't be allowed to live there anymore. I told her I wouldn't, but she still found out. When MIL found out we were divorcing, she grilled her daughter for so long that she admitted to what she did. MIL was so disgusted and disappointed in her that she kicked her out and told her if she was going to be a slut, she could do it to earn a roof over her head. My wife continued doing Uber Eats but started sleeping in her car at night, showering at truck stops, and using lots of Febreze on her clothes and car seats. Her AP already had a roommate and absolutely refused to let anyone else move in with them. If he genuinely loved her, you'd think AP would have found them a new place to live or something, but 6 months later, my ex was still living in her car. She gained a lot of weight from all the fast food, so that alone was karma. Then she met someone else and started sleeping there sometimes, but she messaged me often. Some days she was really upset at herself and claimed she missed me, but other days she was bitter and mean towards me for dumping her and leaving her without a dime. Sometimes I replied, but I never led her on or really cared about what she told me. All I wanted to do was distance myself from her. I'm really glad we didn't conceive children at this point because that would have been much more complicated. Gotta look at the bright side and focus on how happy you can be to have another chance at selecting a better mate. I found a house for sale through my coworker, and I have him over for dinner and vice versa all the time. We became best friends in this process. Wow, OP. I'm glad you had a coworker there with you, who'd been through something similar and had good advice. I'm also glad your MIL backed up the fact your ex messed up by kicking her out. Your ex was not considering anyone but herself when she decided to start an affair with her friend. There are too many people in the world to break your spouse's heart just so you can offer yourself to someone else. They don't have to be with anyone who's in a relationship. Anyone can find someone new if they look in the right place. If anything was wrong in the relationship, it's the unhappy person's responsibility to communicate what the problem is. If they aren't sure what the problem is, they should start by telling their spouse that there is an unknown problem and describe how they feel at certain times. It can be something two people work together to diagnose and solve, but only if both are willing and mature enough to do it. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Take care.